In the summer of 1996, the Meyer family, a German tourist family, embarked on what they hoped would be an unforgettable road trip across the American Southwest. Cornelia Meyer, along with her husband Stefan and their 2 young children, had traveled thousands of miles to experience the vast and awe-inspiring beauty of the United States. Their itinerary included stops at the Grand Canyon, the sweeping deserts of Nevada, and, most ambitiously, Death Valley, one of the hottest, driest, and most inhospitable places on Earth. The family, unfamiliar with the harsh terrain of the desert, was eager to explore its eerie beauty. They were warned about the dangers of venturing into Death Valley, but Cornelia and Stefan believed they could navigate the desert with the help of their rental vehicle, a sturdy, 4-wheel drive SUV. They thought they were prepared. They had maps, water, and some supplies, and as seasoned travelers, they trusted their ability to handle the challenges of the journey. Death Valley, after all, was just another adventure waiting to be discovered. The first day in the desert was full of awe and wonder. The Meyer family marveled at the strange landscapes that stretched before them, the deep canyons, the salt flats, and the towering sand dunes that shimmered in the blistering sun. Their vehicle, a rental SUV, made its way through the winding roads of the valley without issue. The family felt safe and secure as they navigated the narrow, often remote roads of the desert. They stopped occasionally for photographs, enjoying the uniqueness of the landscape that seemed almost alien in its desolation. However, as the afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon, things began to take a sudden turn. While traveling through a particularly desolate stretch of the valley, far from any signs of civilization, their SUV suddenly sputtered and came to an abrupt stop. Cornelia, who was driving, tried to restart the engine, but it was no use. The vehicle had broken down. A sense of unease crept into their hearts as they realized that they were stranded in one of the most unforgiving environments in the world. The temperature in Death Valley, even in the late summer, had reached over 100 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. They were miles away from the nearest help, and the thought of being stuck in this desolate place began to settle in. Stefan tried to remain calm, assuring his family that help would come soon. They had a cell phone, but with little to no signal, they were unable to reach emergency services. Their situation quickly became more dire when they realized that the nearest road was miles away, and the family's water supply was limited. There was no choice but to try to walk to get help. They decided to leave the vehicle behind and attempt to find their way to the nearest ranger station, located over 20 miles away. They believed that they could make it, thinking it would be a matter of a few hours' walk. The sun was beginning to set, and the temperature, while still harsh, was becoming more bearable for their trek. Cornelia and Stefan gathered what little they could, a few bottles of water, some snacks, and their small backpacks. They assumed that walking through the desert was something they could manage. After all, how hard could it be to walk 20 miles across a barren landscape with plenty of daylight left? The family set off, leaving their SUV behind, unaware of the incredible dangers they were about to face in the vast emptiness of Death Valley. The first few hours of walking were difficult but manageable. The family kept a steady pace, and despite the difficulty of walking on uneven terrain, they were hopeful that they would reach the ranger station by nightfall. But as the sun began to set and the temperature dropped slightly, the vastness of the desert became overwhelming. The landscape was unlike anything they had experienced. The endless stretches of salt flats, jagged rocks, and towering dunes made them realize just how far they were from civilization. They were alone in a place where life seemed non-existent. As darkness fell, their situation grew more dire. Their water supply began to dwindle, and the shadows of the desert loomed large. By the time the family realized they were lost, it was already too late. They had wandered off course, unable to find any landmarks that could guide them back to the road. The desert, while beautiful in the light of day, became a hostile, confusing labyrinth at night. The stars, although magnificent, offered no direction. Their hopes of reaching safety were beginning to fade as the hours turned into a long, cold night. In the desert, when darkness falls, the temperature drops quickly, and the cold became unbearable. Without shelter and with little water left, the Meyer family was now trapped in a dangerous and life-threatening situation. As the Meyer family spent their first night stranded in the brutal, unforgiving desert of Death Valley, the reality of their situation became increasingly dire. The temperatures, which had been scorching during the day, now plummeted to near freezing levels. The stark contrast between the daytime heat and the night's bitter chill created an uncomfortable, even dangerous environment. Huddled together, they did their best to conserve warmth, but the cold seeping through their clothes and into their bones left them all shivering uncontrollably. Cornelia and Stefan tried to keep the spirits of their children, Thomas and Annika, up, whispering words of encouragement and telling them stories of home. But as the hours wore on, the harshness of the desert night began to take its toll. The lack of water, the bitter cold, and the growing sense of fear began to sink in. Cornelia's mind raced, trying to figure out what to do next. She knew they couldn't stay in one place for too long. They had to keep moving to avoid becoming even more vulnerable to dehydration and exposure. At dawn, they began to walk again, the oppressive weight of the desert hanging heavily over them. They had not made it far during the night. Their water supply was running out fast, and the thought of how far they had to go to reach help was overwhelming. They had underestimated the scale of the desert. What seemed like a manageable walk in the beginning now appeared to be an insurmountable obstacle. Every step was exhausting, and with each passing hour, their energy waned further. The desert, with its expansive silence and vast, barren stretches, offered little in the way of comfort. The Meyer family struggled to find a rhythm, their steps faltering under the weight of fatigue. The landscape was monotonous, the same endless stretches of sand, scrub, and rocks. They could see no signs of life, no distant horizon to aim for, and no clear path forward. The lack of water was becoming the greatest challenge. Their throats were dry, their bodies weak, and they were now feeling the effects of dehydration. Despite the blisters that had formed on their feet from walking in the harsh terrain, they continued, hoping against hope that they would stumble upon a road or some sign of civilization. Hours turned into days. By the second night, they were barely holding on. The little water they had left was all but gone. Stefan, always the protector, attempted to reassure his wife and children, but even he could see the hopelessness settling in. Their bodies were becoming weaker with every step, and as the days passed, the dehydration began to take a terrible toll. Cornelia's vision blurred, and her head throbbed with every pulse. She could feel her energy draining with each labored breath. Annika, the youngest, began to show signs of exhaustion and delirium. Thomas, despite his best efforts to remain strong for his sister and parents, was also showing signs of severe fatigue. Cornelia and Stefan knew they had to find shelter and water soon, but the cruel, empty desert offered neither. They had no way of knowing how far they had wandered, or if they were even moving in the right direction. Every step seemed to lead them further into the heart of the desert, with no hope in sight. By the third day, their bodies were failing them. The scorching sun beat down relentlessly, dehydrating them further. The landscape was a blur, the hours blending together as they walked aimlessly, their minds growing foggy with each passing hour. Stefan began to lose his ability to focus and struggle with basic decision-making. Cornelia, too, could feel herself slipping, but she tried to remain strong for her children, urging them on as best she could. The haunting truth, however, was starting to settle in. There was a real possibility that they might not make it out of the desert alive. As the sun began to set on their third night of survival, Cornelia and Stefan shared a silent, desperate glance. They knew they had no more time to waste. Their survival depended entirely on finding help before they succumbed to the elements. The family had walked for days without success, and the reality that they might not survive this ordeal began to crush them. The cruel expanse of the desert showed no mercy. It wasn't long before their worst fears were realized. The lack of water, food, and shelter led to the collapse of their strength. Stefan, unable to go any further, collapsed on the ground, unable to continue. Cornelia, too weak to keep going, fell beside him. There, in the silence of the desert, surrounded by endless stretches of sand, the family's journey came to a tragic halt. They had given it their all, fought against the desert's scorching heat and freezing nights, and struggled to stay alive in an environment that seemed to have no mercy. But the desert had proven to be too much. Despite their will to survive, the lack of resources and the sheer vastness of Death Valley proved to be insurmountable. 4 years after the tragic disappearance of Cornelia Meyer and her family, the barren expanse of Death Valley remained silent. The harsh desert offered no clues, no hints as to where the family had wandered, or what had become of them. Their disappearance became a part of the tragic lore of the desert, a mystery lost in the vast emptiness of one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. But in 2000, nearly 4 years after the family vanished, a hiker traversing a remote section of Death Valley stumbled across a disturbing sight. Human remains, scattered and partially buried, left to be claimed by the desert. When the authorities arrived and began their investigation, it quickly became apparent that these remains were those of the Meyer family. The identification was confirmed through dental records, and it was later determined that they had died sometime in 1996, lost and stranded in one of the harshest environments on Earth. The remains were found a staggering 19 miles away from where their car had broken down. It seemed the family had walked for days, desperately seeking help, only to succumb to the brutal forces of the desert: dehydration, exhaustion, and the sweltering heat. In the end, the relentless desert had claimed them, one by one. It was a devastating confirmation of the worst fear. The family had not survived the ordeal. The discovery of their remains was a stark and sobering reminder of just how dangerous Death Valley can be. Despite their prior warnings, their experience as travelers, and their optimism, the Meyer family had ventured into an environment that ultimately proved to be too much. They had underestimated the vast, empty, and hostile nature of the desert, which had taken so many lives before theirs. It was a tragic ending to a family's adventure, an adventure that would never be completed, a dream that would never be realized. In the years that followed the discovery, experts and officials began to study the circumstances of the Meyer family's tragic fate. The case became a cautionary tale for future travelers to the region. It was clear that while Death Valley might appear like a natural wonder, it was also a place of incredible danger. The isolation, the extreme heat, and the unpredictability of the terrain could easily overwhelm even the most prepared adventurers. Authorities began to take a closer look at the risks posed by such remote travel. Signs were erected at the entrances to the valley, cautioning visitors about the dangers of hiking or driving through the area without proper preparation. The desert had claimed yet another victim, but this time, there was hope that their tragic fate could serve as a reminder to others about the importance of respecting the dangers of such extreme environments. Cornelia and Stefan Meyer's story was not just one of loss, but also of the indomitable human spirit. Their attempt to survive against the odds, to make it through an environment as unforgiving as Death Valley, showed the lengths to which people will go to protect their loved ones and to survive. But it also exposed the grave consequences of underestimating nature's power, especially in one of the most hostile environments in the world. Their story, though tragic, had lasting implications for how we understand survival in extreme conditions. It is a reminder that no matter how much we plan or how much we think we know, nature has a way of humbling us. The harsh lessons from the Meyer family's ill-fated journey can be found in every survival story that came after, and their tragedy became a stark reminder to travelers of the importance of preparation, awareness, and respect for nature. For the families and loved ones who were left behind, the discovery of the remains brought a sense of closure, but it was a closure tinged with unbearable grief. The mystery of what had happened to the Meyer family, the uncertainty of their final days, was finally resolved, but the pain of their loss remained a heavy burden. The tragic story of the Meyer family in Death Valley reminds us of the dangers of venturing into extreme environments without the proper preparation and respect for nature. Whether hiking, driving, or exploring remote areas, it is crucial to understand the risks involved and to always be equipped with the necessary supplies, information, and knowledge of the environment. The loss of Cornelia, Stefan, and their children is a painful lesson, one that can save lives if it inspires future adventurers to take the necessary precautions before heading into the wilderness. Let this story inspire a greater awareness of the power of nature and the importance of safety when exploring some of the world's most dangerous places.